The parking lot outside the hospital was silent except for the faint hum of engines cooling down under the afternoon sun. A little boy stood barefoot on the hot pavement, tears running down his dusty cheeks, clutching a crumpled paper in his tiny hand. His voice broke as he pointed toward the emergency entrance. "They won't let my daddy in! They won't let him see my mom!" he cried, his words cutting through the still air like a knife. A group of men in black leather vests, their arms tattooed and faces shadowed by beards and sunglasses, stood only a few steps away. The boy didn't know who they were, but something about them made him feel both scared and safe. One of them, a tall man with long hair, deep eyes, and a heavy silver ring on his hand, crouched down and placed both palms on the boy's shoulders. "Slow down, kid. Tell me what happened. Before we go further, if you believe in kindness, compassion, and second chances, then please take a moment to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us share more stories that prove good hearts still exist in this world." The boy's name was Ethan. He was only 6 years old, but that day he felt older than he'd ever been. His mother had been taken into the hospital early that morning. She was sick, very sick, and his father, Jake, had driven through the night to get there. But when they arrived, the hospital staff refused to let Jake in. He wasn't on the list, they said. The boy's mother had been admitted under a different last name. Rules were rules. "You'll have to wait outside," one of the security guards had said coldly, ignoring Jake's trembling hands and desperate pleas. Ethan remembered his father shouting, his voice echoing across the parking lot, not in anger, but in heartbreak. Jake had served 2 tours overseas. He wasn't a perfect man. Life had beaten him down, broken him, and branded him with mistakes he wished he could undo. But one thing he never stopped being was a father who loved his son, and a husband who adored his wife. Now, the woman he loved was lying behind those glass doors, and he couldn't even hold her hand. The boy had run off, crying, not knowing where else to go. That's when he saw the bikers. A dozen of them, their motorcycles lined up like a row of steel soldiers. To any outsider they looked intimidating, dangerous even. But when Ethan looked into their faces, he didn't see danger. He saw something else: pain, compassion, and quiet strength. The man with the long hair introduced himself as Mason. He was the leader of a local biker club known for helping families in trouble. He'd been through things most people wouldn't believe: homelessness, addiction, loss. But he'd come out the other side, determined to make sure no one else had to suffer alone. When Ethan told them his story, something in Mason's chest tightened. He glanced at the hospital doors, then at the boy. "Stay here, buddy," he said softly. "We'll handle this." The bikers gathered around Mason as he spoke quickly and quietly. Moments later, they started their engines. The sound rolled across the parking lot like thunder. People turned their heads, startled. Hospital staff peeked out the windows, and then, slowly but firmly, the bikers began to ride forward. Not fast, not loud, just steady, forming a line in front of the emergency entrance. Mason dismounted first, his boots crunching against the pavement, and walked toward the security guard who had turned Jake away. Inside, Jake stood helpless near the doors, his fists clenched, his eyes red. When he saw the bikers, his jaw dropped. He didn't know them. He hadn't called anyone. But when Mason looked at him and nodded, Jake somehow understood. Mason approached the security guard, his voice calm but heavy with authority. "That man out there," he said, pointing toward Jake, "is trying to see his wife. You said he can't go in because of a name mix-up. You're telling me a man who's fought for this country can't hold his wife's hand because of a form?" The guard hesitated, glancing nervously toward the glass doors. "Sir, I'm just following protocol." "Protocol doesn't have a heartbeat," Mason interrupted. "That man does. That kid does." He nodded toward Ethan, who stood a few steps behind him, clutching his little fists. "Now, you can follow rules all you want, but sometimes doing what's right means breaking what's easy." For a long moment no one spoke. The bikers stood silently, their presence alone a statement. The air grew thick with tension. Finally, the hospital administrator appeared, a woman in a grey suit, clipboard in hand. She demanded to know what was going on. Mason explained again, calmer this time, but with a conviction that couldn't be ignored. Something in his tone, or maybe in Ethan's tear-streaked face, made her pause. She turned to the guard. "Let him in," she said quietly. "Just let him in." Jake froze, his breath caught in his throat. For a moment he couldn't move. Then Ethan ran to him, wrapping his small arms around his father's leg. "They said yes, Daddy," he whispered. Jake bent down, hugged his son tight, and whispered back, "Thank you, buddy." The hospital doors slid open with a soft hiss. Jake turned to Mason, unsure what to say. Mason just gave him a small smile and a nod. "Go," he said. "She's waiting." Inside, the hospital smelled of disinfectant and worry. Jake walked through the white hallways like a man in a dream, Ethan's little hand in his. When they reached the room, his wife lay pale and still on the bed, an oxygen line at her nose. Jake fell to his knees beside her, taking her hand, whispering her name. She stirred slightly, her eyes fluttering open, and when she saw him she began to cry. "I thought you weren't coming," she whispered. "I'd walk through fire if I had to," he said, his voice breaking. "I'm here." Outside, Mason and his crew waited quietly. The roar of engines had faded, replaced by something deeper, the peace. "That comes from knowing you've done the right thing." A few minutes later, Mason leaned against his bike and looked toward the sky. He remembered his own wife, the one he'd lost years ago to cancer. He hadn't been allowed in the hospital room near the end because of strict visiting rules during the pandemic. He'd begged, cried, shouted, but they never let him in. He had to say goodbye through a window. That pain had never left him, but today, helping this man and his little boy had eased a part of it. Hours passed. The sun began to dip behind the hospital building. Jake stepped outside again, his son beside him. His eyes were swollen, but for the first time in days, he smiled. "She's awake," he told Mason. "She's going to be okay." Mason reached out his hand, and Jake shook it hard like one soldier to another. "I don't know how to thank you," Jake said. "You don't have to," Mason replied. "Just take care of your family. That's how you thank us." Before leaving, Mason knelt down and looked Ethan in the eyes. "You did good today, kid. You didn't give up. That's what makes a real man." Ethan smiled, his eyes wide with admiration. "Are you angels?" he asked innocently. Mason chuckled. "Nah, little man, just bikers with big hearts." The next morning, the story spread online. A hospital visitor had filmed part of the scene, capturing the moment the bikers stood between a desperate father and an unbending rule. It went viral. Millions of people watched as the rough, tattooed men stood quietly, not as rebels, but as protectors of something pure. Comments flooded in, calling them heroes. Mason didn't think of himself that way, but he couldn't deny that something beautiful had come from that day. A reminder that compassion doesn't always come in clean uniforms or polished shoes. Sometimes it rides on two wheels and wears leather. A few days later, when Jake's wife was discharged, Mason and his crew were there again, waiting by the bikes. They gave Ethan a small leather jacket with the club's patch stitched on the back, a pair of angel wings wrapped around a heart. "For courage," Mason said. Ethan hugged him tightly, and for a second, Mason had to look away so the boy wouldn't see the tears in his eyes. Life went on. Months later, Jake sent a letter to the biker club. He said his wife had fully recovered, and that day had changed everything. He'd started volunteering at a shelter, helping other families who couldn't afford hospital care. "I learned that kindness can come from the unlikeliest places," he wrote. "That day, you didn't just help me see my wife. You helped me see humanity again." When Mason finished reading the letter, he folded it neatly and slipped it into his leather vest pocket. He didn't need applause. He didn't need thanks. The look on that boy's face was all the reward he'd ever want. He started his motorcycle, the engine rumbling like a heartbeat, and rode into the fading sunlight, not as a hero, but as a man who believed the world still had good left in it. And maybe, just maybe, the next time someone sees a biker on the road, they'll remember that story. The little boy outside the hospital, the man who just wanted to see his wife, and the group of strangers who turned pain into hope. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. It helps us keep sharing real stories that remind us what humanity truly means. Before you go, Tell us in the comments below, what does kindness mean to you? Because sometimes one small act of courage can change someone's world forever.